Welcome to our latest meeting of the Leo Baeck Institute Book Club. I'll give a brief little blurb for new people about the Leo Baeck Institute. We are a German Jewish archive founded in 1955, actually in Jerusalem, and then branches were opened in London and New York, and now in Berlin, Germany. The archive and library here in New York is the biggest of all the different branches of the Leo Baeck Institute, where we support research on German Jewish history in many different fields of its history, for example. So not just the Holocaust. Though today we are going to talk about the Holocaust. We're going to talk about the novel Remote Sympathy. And I'm pleased to say we have with us as our guest the author, Catherine Chidgey, which thank you, Catherine, for being with us today. I'm going to introduce Catherine to everyone, and then we will, Catherine will open up with a presentation and a small slideshow. And after that presentation, which will run maybe, I'm making this up, 15 minutes, more or less maybe, we will open it up for our discussion. At that time, as is always the case, right now we tape the presentations, we record it for everyone, but then we turn the recording off for the actual discussion. Catherine Chidgey is an award-winning and best-selling New Zealand novelist and short story writer. Her first novel, In a Fishbone Church, won the Betty Trask Award and was longlisted for the Orange Prize. Golden Deed was Time Out's Book of the Year, a best book in the LA Times Book Review, and a notable book in the New York Times Book Review. Her fourth novel, The Wish Child, was published in 2016 and won the 2017 Acorn Foundation Fiction Prize, the country's richest literary prize. Congratulations, Catherine, for that. In her new novel, Remote Sympathy, it's about a few years only, we visit the concentration camp of Buchenwald in Germany. We see it through the eyes of many different characters within the novel, including an SS man, an SS man's family, a part Jewish prisoner who's also a doctor, and others. So I think I will stop here. And Catherine, you can begin your presentation, and afterwards we'll have our usual discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael, and thank you so much for the invitation to talk to you. It's really lovely to have this kind of international connection with my readers. Good morning from New Zealand. Good afternoon to you. I thought I would start just by telling you a little bit of the background to the writing of the book, the seeds that were planted sometimes many years ago that led to me writing Remote Sympathy. So I'm just actually going to, can I minimize the slides so that I can see my notes on screen? Otherwise I can read them off paper. I'll read them off paper, that's okay. So I first visited Buchenwald in 1996. I was studying in Berlin. I'd done an undergraduate degree in German here in New Zealand. And then I had a scholarship from the DAAD to do postgraduate study in Berlin. And while I was there, I took a university course on German history, specifically for international students. And our professor, the historian Wolfgang Wippermann, took us all on a trip to Buchenwald. And we slept in the former SS barracks, although not, as you might imagine, very well. And I saw just how close the camp was to the beautiful town of Weimar. You know, Weimar, the cradle of German culture and enlightenment, and home to literary giants Goethe and Schiller. You can see in the town centre the famous statue of them that exemplifies honorable German brotherhood and humanity. And so the geography of the place really affected me, that realization that I hadn't really understood before, that the camp was so close to the houses of ordinary Germans, and that it was fully visible from the plains, from the farms on those plains to the north of the camp. It wasn't, out east like the death camps, but it was in the very heart of Germany. And the tension between proximity and distance really informs the book for me. It's there in the title, Remote Sympathy. On that trip, our professor told us that when the land was cleared for the camp, when the prisoners cleared the trees from the Ettersberg hillside, one ancient oak was left standing at the heart of the camp. Could we have the next slide, please?
That was the oak tree.
That's the oak tree, yeah, the famous Gerta Oak. So a tree under which Goethe was supposed to have sat and rested and composed poetry. And this was a really sacred site for the SS, a symbol of cultured, noble Germany. But for the prisoners, it was also quite a special symbol, because it was a reminder of the fact that Germany was long gone. And the prisoners actually called it Buchenwald's first prisoner. Could we have the next slide, please? It's the tree again. So legend had it that the tree's fate was tied to Germany's fate, and that if it perished, then so too would Germany. And in mid-1944, there was an air raid on the armaments factories next to the camp, and sparks from that air raid flew across the wire, and the tree was set alight. And now you can see the stump that is still there. That's all that remains of the tree. And so that symbol really stayed with me, from back in 1996, as did that push and pull of proximity and distance. So I kind of tucked those little seeds away. And then years later, I was working on my earlier novel, The Wish Child, which is also set in Nazi Germany. And for that book, I was researching things medical, medical treatments under Hitler. And I happened to read about cancer treatment in Nazi Germany. Hitler's mother had died of the disease. He poured an enormous amount of funding into cancer research. So things like light therapy and low vitamin diets, fruit juice injections, Chinese rhubarb, even hemlock were all touted as potential breakthrough cures for cancer. And so was electrotherapy. And for some reason, I just had a little ping when I read about electrotherapy and thought, oh, that's somehow relevant to my writing as well. I'll tuck that away. And so a couple of years later, when I started to think about my next book, I remembered that, and I decided that I would base an electrotherapy machine on those machines that I'd read about. So Leonard's machine in the book is based on real machines. And while I was also researching medical topics, I stumbled across that old medical concept of remote sympathy, and I knew straight away that was really central to Leonard's theory of how his machine would work, but it was also really central to how the book would work. And at that time, when I was still researching medical fields, I read about the transparent man. So could we have the next slide, please? So the transparent man was a figure displayed in 1930 at the German Hygiene Museum in Dresden. And it was a life-size figure of the human body. It was built around a real skeleton with all the organs shown, as well as the nervous and circulatory systems. And this figure was an absolute sensation. It was the first time that people had really been able to, see inside themselves in this three-dimensional way. And the transparent man became one of the guiding images in the book. It was kind of a haunting presence for me from the earliest days of writing this story. And eventually it sent out its fibers of connection to the whole book, which you can read as an attempt to, you know, see inside humans with all our complexities and failings. And for me, on one level, the transparent man is symbolic of miraculous life. You know, it's evidence of how our many different parts, even those that are remote from each other, are connected. But I was drawn to the ambiguity of the figure. You know, the pose might suggest joy, the celebration of life, and a kind of openness. The figure also suggests to me a laying bare of secrets because of its transparency. And so this transparent man seemed very much to belong in a novel where the characters are all gradually revealing themselves for better or worse, and when they all make confessions of a kind, whether deliberately or not. So maybe the figure is expressing joy, maybe he's raising his arms in supplication, maybe he's begging, maybe he's surrendering. I think, well, I hope that, like the story, he contains all of those things. Another seed for the book came quite early, when I was reading about the liberation of the camp and about General Patton being so horrified by what he found there in April 1945, that he ordered the 1,000 citizens of Weimar to be rounded up and walked up the hill so they could tour the camp and see at close range what had been happening on their doorstep. Those terrible conditions that, although they'd been unfolding so close by, had only ever aroused in those citizens a remote sympathy, if anything. So there's footage of that trip in the next few slides. If we could have the next slide, show a few stills that I took from that video footage. So you can see at the start of the trip, they're quite upbeat, they're smiling, they're dressed in nice clothes. If we could have the second slide. They're out enjoying the spring weather. And the next slide, even as they pass through the gates of Buchenwald, that you can see there, they're still smiling. And then if we could just move through the next slides, a few seconds on each, that would be good. Later, they're much more subdued, as you can see in these slides. A woman faints. You can see the shock on their faces at what they've just been shown. If we could go through to the last slide is one of an old woman. There's a couple more. Okay, so we can stop there. And a prisoner is helping her, a former prisoner is helping her. So those are the citizens of Weimar that became very real to me in the writing of the book. And in order to bring all the different characters to life, I knew that I needed to go back to that actual territory that I'd visited so long before in 1996. So I needed, for my research, not just to be distant, but to be right up close as I could get, given the passage of the years since these events unfolded. So I went back to Weimar in 2018 on a research trip. And one of the things I remember from that trip is visiting the state archives in Weimar, and the head archivist there was incredibly helpful, offered me a behind the scenes tour, and the building is the former Gestapo headquarters and prison. And so the archivist took me down to, you know, the surely haunted basement to show me the salvaged index cards from Buchenwald, drawers and drawers and drawers of file cards stamped with a number denoting a person. I also corresponded with a man called Harry Stein at the Buchenwald Memorial for more than 2 years. He was also incredibly helpful. And when I went there, he and his staff hunted out every obscure piece of ephemera that I requested, and some that I didn't. If we could have the next slide. So I was able to see floor plans of these beautiful villas, these officers' houses, 10 of them that existed on the edges of the camp, just through a small patch of trees. And they were designed by an architect prisoner. If we could have the next slide. I could see prisoners' designs for the beautiful lamps and fireplaces and credenzas and cradles that would fill these homes. I could see greeting cards made by prisoner calligraphers for the SS to mark special occasions, like the birth of the commandant's daughter. And the next slide, I saw family photos of children playing in their Buchenwald gardens, playing soldiers, playing leapfrog. And the next two slides, I saw lots of pictures of the zoo, the camp zoo that was located right next to the camp fence for the enjoyment of the SS and their families. If we could have the next one. I saw pictures of the falconry that was also built for the enjoyment of the SS, but was open as well to the wider public. So they could catch the bus up the hill from Weimar and come and see the falconry. And I saw clandestine photos taken by prisoners in secret that showed the actual conditions inside the fence, and I was able to compare those with the official photos that were taken by the SS that were quite different. And I saw postcards sent home by prisoners with very, very limited information on them, only the permitted information like I am well and in good spirits. And those told their own coded stories. Harry Stein gifted me a fossil of an ammonite of a kind that's found in this particular area on the Ettersberg. And that was evidence to me of a much more distant past, and that wove its way into the book's symbolism too. Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. I made a special trip to Berlin to see a particular sculpture, a piece called The Last Face. So as I describe in the book, after the Gerta Oak burned and was felled, the prisoners took splinters of it, fragments of it, as relics, as charms. In the book, I have Leonard taking a piece of it. But a famous prisoner called Bruno Arpitz, who worked in pathology, salvaged a block of the wood, and he carved the last face based on the death masks that hung in the pathology building. So a single face based on the features of many. And I'd seen photos of this sculpture, but I really felt like I needed to see it in person. So I tracked it down to the German Historical Museum in Berlin. And when I saw it, I realized that the photos all showed the view that you can see on the left there of the front of the face. But when I saw it in person, I saw the charred back of the wood and realized that the artist had chosen to preserve that part of the tree's history. And it speaks to the fact that many thousands of Buchenwald's prisoners left the camp by way of smoke, by way of ash, by way of the crematorium. So the last face became an important symbol for me in the book as well. It's the dark counterpart to that figure of light and miraculous life that is the transparent man. I really desperately wanted to see the transparent man too, but I knew that he'd been destroyed during the bombing of Dresden. However, when I was at this museum in Berlin to see the last face, time was really short. I was running through the galleries to get to the part where the last face was, and I ran past the transparent man, and I looked and thought, how can that be? How can he be here? But there he was. It was one of those research gifts, you know, those wondrous moments that can happen from time to time. He was, in fact, an exact replica of the original figure. And he'd been made for the US market in the 1930s because there was such avid interest in this model. There was one difference. because he'd been made for the American market, he'd been made with no genitals. So just a kind of a plastic Action Man mound. I'll leave my introduction there. Hopefully that's given you a little bit of an idea around how I came to write the book, the things that fed the book.
Please like this video and subscribe for more content from the Leo Baeck Institute.